Thanks for tuning in. I'm Handan in Seoul. COSPAR 2024, a global space conference often referred to as the Space Olympics, is being held in Korea's southern port city of Busan. This year's event, hosted by Korea for the first time, brought together around 3,000 space scientists and industry officials from some 60 nations, including representatives from NASA, Japan's National Space Agency, and the European Space Agency. Under the tagline, Team Spirit in Space, participants put their heads together to advance global space research and build international partnerships to achieve greater leaps into space. In this edition of Within the Frame, we have the honor of speaking with Pascal Ehrenfreund, the president of the Committee on Space Research, to discuss the future of space exploration. Thank you so much for joining us.
I thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
All right, so the 45th Scientific Assembly of the Committee on Space Research, that's the full name, is being held in Busan. For our viewers who may not be familiar with it, tell us more about the biennial Global Space Conference.
Well, the Committee on Space Research was founded in 1958, and it represents a global network of about 13,000 space scientists. And they are all dedicated to drive innovation and also collaboration across all space science disciplines. So that would include Earth and atmospheric science, planetary science, astrophysics, and life sciences. And COSPAR is really specialized in advancing science through space-based research, so space missions, space probes, space observations. And it organizes a scientific assembly every 2 years in a different country. And these assemblies bring together, as you already said, about 2,000 to 3,000 scientists from around the world to present the latest discoveries in their fields. And the assembly also features high-level meetings. You mentioned space agency leaders. We have also industry panels. We have interdisciplinary lectures, also in order to teach scientists about other fields. We had very engaging public talks, for the South Korean public. And we have an exhibition which is showcasing major space agencies and industry. So in general, it provides really ample opportunities for these 3,000 scientists and other engineers for networking, knowledge exchange, and fostering global partnerships, and of course also friendships.
Of course. And it seems the COSPAR Assembly's significance is increasing amid a heated global space race and rapidly changing space landscape. It plays a crucial role in bringing the world together to promote innovation and research and also facilitate global collaboration, which now seems more important than ever before. And this year, South Korea had the privilege to host the event in Busan. How was Korea selected as the host for this year, and what significance does it hold?
Well, the decision on where to hold a COSPAR assembly is made many years in advance because it's an extensive preparation which is required for such a large conference. So our local organizing committee and the COSPAR community have worked, tirelessly over 2 years to ensure the success of this event in Busan. And this year's assembly, as you already said, is very, very successful. And we have nearly 3,000 participants from more than 60 countries. And, the attendees engage with scientists. They present over 3,000 talks and posters and participate in 150 scientific events. So in general, I also want to express that COSPAR is really very happy and thrilled to host its scientific assembly here in Busan with the team spirit in space research. And as you said before, these are exciting times also for the Republic of Korea, which has very ambitious plans to explore the moon and Mars in the coming decades, among many other space ventures. So we also congratulate the newly established Korea Aerospace Administration, CASA. And Korea's space strategy clearly aims to start a new era and create a really robust space ecosystem, involve the private sector, expand investments, and establish top-level research and industrial environments. And that makes it very exciting also to be here, and all the 3,000 participants are somehow a part of that.
As you just mentioned, the assembly certainly grabbed a lot of media attention here in Korea as it marked the global debut of Korea's newly launched space agency, CASA, which we'll talk about as we move on. But before that, Dr. Aaron Freund, I want to talk about new space. The starting line may vary among countries, but a shift toward the private sector-led commercial space exploration has become the dominant global trend, giving rise to the name New Space. What does this mean for the global space industry?
Well, the space sector is developing at an accelerating pace with the involvement of numerous stakeholders. So we have really many different stakeholders, commercial actors, established industries, but also academia. We have a lot of startups, of course. And these commercial space actors, in collaboration with public partners, that's an important sentence, are somehow revolutionizing the industry, being more cost-effective, having reusable launch vehicles, and also really ambitious missions. And to strengthen companies in the commercial space market, I think both dedicated funding programs and also non-monetary support, such as consistent and predictable national regulatory frameworks, are really required. So one effective tool to foster commercialization is the establishment of public-private partnerships. That's also foreseen in the Korean space strategy, and that helps to realize projects serving both the public and commercial interests. But I think it's important to say that currently companies in the new space sectors are partners, and they still depend a lot on public funding. So it's some kind of a transition period, and it is equally important for governments to remain engaged in the governance of space activities. So you have to find a good balance, yeah? And I think the goal of everybody, also worldwide, is to balance policy, commercial, and also scientific interests in the new space era.
I think you highlighted an important point that we're now at a transitional phase, but the government, it's important for all the governments to still stay engaged. But Dr. Aaron Freund, there are also concerns about the new space era. NASA Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy, speaking in Busan, said that commercial space exploration is rapidly expanding, but there aren't enough regulations. What are your thoughts?
Well, in the area of the current space sector, it is crucial to balance the interests of various stakeholders, and that includes governments, commercial actors, also the scientific community. I've always to speak for the scientific community, being a part of it. And for instance, particularly in the space exploration and also, resource activities. So for instance, mining on a solar system body. So we have the United Nations and committees like the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. I think that's quite known to everybody, UN COPUS. And they are really deliberating governance and regulatory matters concerning sustainability of space activities beyond Earth's orbit. And we have a lot of countries which are involved in that. More than 100 countries are here on one table to discuss the future. And for example, in June 2024, UN COPUS agreed to establish an action team on lunar consultations. So states have the obligation under the Outer Space Treaty to authorize and supervise the space activities of private actors under their jurisdictions. And how states implement their rights and obligations under international space law treaties is more or less their own prerogative. So there should be continued discussion at this governance level to further cooperation and coordination of space activities. But we are living in a very, very exciting time. There have never been so many missions which are currently active and planned in the future, which are exploring our solar system. And it's a wonderful time, and we have to find a solution with good regulations, which are not too restrictive, and we all can agree upon.
I think you've already briefly touched upon this, but you said that there are existing agreements and treaties, but how can we further strengthen a global regulatory framework to prevent conflicts and promote cooperation as more nations and private entities as well engage in outer space exploration?
Yeah, so it is really important that the deliberations at a global governance level continue. And that goes very often also through the United Nations. So you have to continue to foster sustainability, consistency, transparency, and interoperability, among states and space actors. It's not an easy process, but everybody knows, and we discussed it a lot worldwide, that we need enhanced coordination and cooperation in promoting the safety of space operations in Earth's orbit. And we need a common understanding how we carry out lunar activities, precisely, to avoid conflicts, misunderstanding, and mishaps when different nations and actors will carry out missions to the moon in the near future. So the process I mentioned earlier, the establishment of consultation teams called ATLAC under the United Nations, has the objective to address such matters. So it's a matter of governance more than enacting new regulations. And it's, I totally agree, it's sometimes difficult to reach consensus among states, but this global regulatory framework is in the mind of everybody, and there are a lot of attempts, to find good solutions, nationally, internationally, but also under the United Nations.
Meanwhile, Korea continues to strive in its space endeavors. It successfully completed the third launch of its homegrown rocket, Nuri, positioning itself as the 7th country capable of independently sending a commercial satellite into space. We still have a long way to go to catch up with major space powers, but how do you assess the current level of Korea's space technology?
Well, as you mentioned, in your question, South Korea is already quite accomplished in space technology and missions. You have a launcher, a successful lunar orbiter project, you have satellite technology, just to name a few. And in my previous positions, in the space sector, I have been involved in many international cooperations with Korea. Korea has also an educated science and engineering workforce and really fosters international cooperation in the space sector already since quite some time. So the newly founded space agency CASA and also the new space strategy really discuss important goals for the next decade, and one of them is to be the 5th space nation in 2020, I think in 2045, and planned is a lander to the moon in 2032 and a journey to Mars by 2045. So these are amazing goals, and it is clear that the Korean space sector is already advanced.
Korea may be a latecomer, but it has ambitious goals, as you mentioned at the top, and the Yoon administration is pumping over $70 billion, or perhaps even more than that, to support scientists and companies plant a Korean flag on Mars by 2045, as you mentioned, and to land a lunar probe by 2032. Some very exciting, it'll be very exciting, as you said, to watch from here on out. The Korea Aerospace Administration, or CASA, was launched earlier this year as Korea looks to open up a new chapter in space exploration. What do you consider the primary roles of a government space agency, and what strategies would you recommend for CASA?
Well, I think that the new space strategy of CASA, which was also discussed here at the COSPAR Scientific Assembly, positions, South Korea very well for the future. So in particular, we have mentioned already many things, but CASA aims to foster more than 2,000 space-related companies in the future, and also to create more than 500,000 new jobs in the field. So it's not really for me to give an advice, but the usual ingredients to advance, the national space sector are: it is important to build an effective space ecosystem with alliances between government, space industry, and academia to advance space technologies. And for my personal impression, being quite often here in South Korea, this works much, much better than in other countries where there is much more competition and disagreements. So these alliances are, I think, rather easy and more easy to form here in South Korea. The other thing is to invest in startup companies, and that's also in the space strategy, and that's what most of the countries which want to advance their space sector are doing. So these startup companies have to develop new business models for space technologies and service. They have to be innovative, they have to be cutting edge, and they need support. And also, what is important, but which is also in the strategy, is strengthen the space workforce and educate, the next space generation so that they are able, to develop new technologies. And we have a problem all over the world with the STEM workforce, in science, technology, and engineering. So it is very important, and I think South Korea is very lucky having actually a very strong base in science and engineering. So has probably less troubles to develop that than other space nations. And last but not least, we already mentioned to foster international, cooperations in the space sector. That's a really, really important thing, and also mentioned in the space strategy. So I think there is a very good basis, and now it's about implementation.
So you mentioned that Korea needs to space a healthy space ecosystem among the government, the companies, as well as the academia. We also need to invest in startups. You also mentioned a bit about education and global partnerships. But what do you think are some of Korea's biggest challenges in getting there, in achieving those goals?
Yeah, well, it is important to foster entrepreneurship and to provide funding and education for young entrepreneurs. And what is always a challenge in many countries is risk aversion. Yeah, so there needs to be space now in another sense, space to innovate, but also to fail, and to deliver new concepts and space technologies. Yeah, we have seen that with many of the new space companies in other countries, there have been quite some failures, but this is necessary in order to succeed at the end when you develop new technologies. So you have to make room for that. I'm coming from Europe, and I have to say that risk aversion is very, very high. And that's why we do not have so many startups in Europe in the space sector. And we have really also to do our task and improve it. And this is an important factor. And as we discussed before, regulation should balance, the interests of different stakeholders involved in space missions. Space sustainability is since a few years an important topic. We want to develop the space sector responsible and not destroy or contaminate objects in our solar system. And that requires a dialogue among all the stakeholders involved in space missions and also international agreements. And so all these aspects are challenges, and it requires a good space ecosystem in the country. That's now we are back at what we discussed in the previous question.
And our final point of discussion today, Dr. Ehrenfreund, amid a heated global race for lunar exploration, some are stepping ahead, advancing from lunar probe to commercial lunar services. What are your prospects for this, and what is COSPAR's role in the world's push for the moon?
Yeah, so it's correct. There are currently over 150 lunar and cislunar space missions planned in the next decade. But we have also seen how difficult it is to realize them. In the recent months, 6 missions have been launched to the moon. India and Japan became the 4th and 5th nation, respectively, to achieve successful soft landing alongside a private mission. So China has just recently returned the first ever samples from the lunar far side. So how fast a cislunar economy actually develops is not known. Nobody can make these predictions. Yeah? And we have now the Artemis program. We have the International Lunar Research Station planned by China and partners. So they envisage infrastructure, humans on the moon in the next decade. That's all very exciting. And for a while, space agency and commercial partners will go hand in hand, yeah, and work together. COSPAR's role is that space research is very dynamic and is an integral component for future lunar programs. We have many lunar experts among the associates of COSPAR. And if you want to successfully land and operate on the surface on the moon and do that responsible, then you really need to consider new scientific data and findings. And the COSPAR community provides this knowledge transfer and supports also international partnerships. So COSPAR also supports the United Nations concerning responsible lunar space exploration. So there are many different points.
Exciting times indeed. Our discussion concludes here, but we look forward to seeing the continued advancements and innovations that COSPAR will undoubtedly help bring to the world of space science. Thank you so much, Dr. Erin Freund, for making time for us and sharing your invaluable insights.
Kamsahamnida.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time next week for more. Have a great weekend.